Chad. Time to go, yeah. Okay, thank you. The band is great, aren't they? We really enjoyed having them here. It's kind of hard to get them virtually distancing in my backyard, but we did it. Anyways, welcome to our 7th virtual cooking class. Tonight we feature the renowned baker and cook, Hedy Milgrom. But first, I want to let you know for next week, we are pleased to announce that we will be featuring Leah Eisenberg and her daughter Shira. They will be cooking baked green bean fries, baked ziti, and oatmeal raisin cookies, which I assume are baked too, but we'll find out. Both Leah and Shira have been volunteers numerous times in the B'nai Yeshurun kitchen, and Shira often helps her grandmother, Faith Eisenberg, prepare for kiddushes and synagogue luncheons. Leah and Shira did much of the cooking for Shira's bat mitzvah last year, and the talented 13-year-old has kitchen skills and abilities well beyond her years, so it should be really a lot of fun next week. I want to also thank Chad Cohn, our producer, director, and Zoom master. In fact, this week he spent an inordinate amount of time and effort in coordinating the production. And I think maybe we should change the name of this course to Cooking with Murray and Zoom Master Chad. And I'm in agreement with that as long as I get top billing, of course. Also, don't forget to put yourself or your Zoom on speaker view so you can see tonight's session properly. Okay. Most people are satisfied to be good at one thing or another, but not Hedy Milgrom. When she takes on a task, and she does take on many, many tasks, she doesn't just succeed, she excels. Whether a wife, mother, and grandmother, or whether an accomplished musician, or whether a respected Jewish professional, or whether a capable community leader and volunteer, or whether a renowned baker and cook, Hedy personifies excellence. The name Hedy means warfare or battle, and when she battles, she wins. Her victories translate into benefits for all of us. Tonight, she will share her challah baking and braiding expertise, one of her very special victories, which we will all enjoy. So I give you Hedy Milgrom.
Thank you, Murray. That was a very beautiful introduction, and I'm glad this is taped, because if I need it sometime, I can play it. But I'm thrilled to be here, and I want to offer a few thank yous first. I want to thank you, Murray, for inviting me, because I'm going to enjoy this a lot. It's one of my favorite things to do. And I want to thank Chad for being an amazing Zoom master and tech wizard and slideshow master. You'll get to see a little bit of his work later on. He's up at 1 in the morning emailing people. I wasn't answering at 1 in the morning, but he's doing things all the time. So thank you, Chad, for your dedication to all this. And to my husband, Michael, here, wave, Michael. He's sitting in the sidelines here because he can't see him still. He's going to manage the screen back and forth a little bit. And I thank Michael as well. And I also want to extend a special welcome. I looked at the a few minutes ago, and I saw that my brother-in-law, Aaron from Minneapolis, has joined us. My cousin Tony from Los Angeles, one of my dearest friends, Barbara Freeman from San Francisco, my oldest and dearest friend, Miriam Horowitz from Milwaukee, and I'll look through more later. There may be a few other folks from near and far, well, near for sure and far. So here's my goal for tonight. I want to share with you my love of baking challah. And I also want to demystify it for you. There may be some of you who are bakers already and have been baking bread, or there may be others of you who love to bake, but the one thing you're not going to ever do is touch bread because you don't have a relationship with yeast. And you're really worried that if you touched it, you'd kill it. I want to dispel these falsehoods. There'll be no fake news here tonight when it comes to how to bake and how to make challah. And I'm also going to share with you the shortcut that I use, which has everything to do with my favorite kitchen appliance, my handy dandy Cuisinart food processor. I may sound like I'm getting paid endorsements at a few places this evening, but I'm not. It's just that when I talk about my Cuisinart, I don't know another food processor that has the kind of motor that the Cuisinart has, and it won't burn up and it won't stop on you when you're trying to make challah dough. And that's really important. So the recipes that I sent out are the one that said Hedy's challah, which I now call my classic challah. That one is written in the way that I make it in the food processor. The honey whole wheat raisin challah I sent out, that one is written in a traditional way, as if you're mixing it by hand or maybe with a KitchenAid, which also is a fine way to do it, but it's a little bit longer. You can adapt any bread recipe to the way that I do it in the food processor. We're going to go through that. I'm going to show you. So I'm going to be talking about a few different things. What we're going to do first is we're going to make some dough. You're going to watch the technique I use. Unfortunately, you're not going to be able to touch it. So I'll try to describe it as we go along. So you won't exactly feel the texture, but you'll be able to see it from when I'm doing it. After that, I'm going to have a brief little interlude because I'd like to share with you the influences on my life that have led me to really love to bake challah and to bake in general. Some people have green thumbs. I like to think I have a white thumb, flour, as opposed to Murray's green thumb, but Murray has a white thumb too. And then I'm going to share with you 3 different braiding techniques that I do. One is the 6 braided challah, one is the 4 braided, which is the one I use the most, and then another one is a round 4 braid. And each of those braiding techniques was also sent to you. One last word. Anyone who ever comes to one of my challah demonstrations has a carte blanche to email, text me, call me if you have questions when you're making your challah. The only thing I ask in return is that you send me a picture because I love to see how things come out and how everybody does. All right, so without further ado, I don't know if anybody is actually doing this along with me tonight. I'm going to assume probably not, but I'm going to start off by preparing my yeast, because the yeast has to proof. So in advance, I went ahead and instead of just putting a teaspoon of sugar in with my yeast, since the recipe calls for a 1/2 cup of sugar, I just put the whole 1/2 cup of sugar in and my 1.5 tablespoons of yeast. A 1.5 tablespoons of the instant dry yeast is the same as 2 packets. So 1 packet of yeast is 2 1/4 teaspoons. So this is a 1.5 tablespoons, which is double. So if you'll hang on 1 second, talk amongst yourselves while I get some very warm water. And when I say warm, very warm, it's not boiling, but it's also not just lukewarm. It should be really warm, okay? And you won't kill out these that way. Hang on.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Okay, thanks.
Sorry, I tried to get back as quickly as I could so you wouldn't have to listen to Murray singing. All right, so I just poured in my cup of water into this. I'm gonna stir it up. And I'm using my tablespoon measuring spoon because once again, I try to be frugal in how many different things I dirty up. So this measured the dry yeast, and it's gonna measure another ingredient in a little while, and I'll use it to shovel this in. So I'm gonna set this aside, and it's gonna proof. And I will know that the yeast is active because I'm gonna see all kinds of bubbles, and hopefully I can show you what those bubbles look like. Okay, so the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put my flour, almost all of it. It calls for, it says between 5.5 and 6 cups. So I'm going to put roughly, probably a little less than 5.5 cups. Now, I don't sift my flour, but you can see I have this is my little measuring thing. I kind of mix up, I aerate the flour, and we're going to talk a little bit about how you measure flour. When I put it in my cup, I feather it in. Here's what I don't do. I'm going to show you this because so many people do it just out of habit. They put the flour in, they go like that. Never do that, because what you're doing is you're compacting the flour and you're going to end up with too much flour, too dense. So you want to make sure that you labor it in, and then you don't have to sift your flour. Now I will tell you that most bread bakers, or a lot of bread bakers, insist that the only way to really measure flour is to weigh it. And I have started to bake sourdough bread recently, and it has only turned out well when I've weighed the flour. Those recipes come with instructions as to how many grams or how many ounces. I've been making this challah for 40 years, or 36 years, and it didn't, I just always did it this way, so I don't know what the weight would be, but close enough. So it's 2 cups. 3. 4. 5. And I'm going to just put more flour in here and put a little bit more in here. And I'll be adding more later. You can't take away flour, but you can always add. So now it's 1.5 teaspoons of salt, which I know how much that is in the palm of my hand, so I don't bother measuring it, but you may want to measure it. And then I aerate it, so I distribute the salt. I pulse in the food processor a couple times, all right? And now the next thing is I need to put in my eggs and my oil. So first I measure my oil. And from that oil, if you read the whole recipe through first, you'll see that it says, put a little bit of oil in the bowl that you're going to leave the challah in. So I always just pour off about 1 teaspoon of the oil into this bowl, and that's where the bowl of dough is going to rest when it's rising. And then I pour the oil in my food processor, and now I'm going to put in my 3 eggs. And I hope that you always crack your eggs into a bowl before you put them in. First of all, kosher cooks make sure that there's no blood spot on their eggs, and you always want to make sure they're fresh and smell good, which they are. So you always want to crack your eggs individually and add them individually instead of all at once without having looked at them. Oops. No shells. 2 and there's my eggs. Now, now the secret ingredient. I'm going to add to my, I don't know if you can see there how it's kind of foamy and bubbly, all this foam. That means the yeast is active, it's proofed. Now to my yeast and water and sugar, I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of brandy. Exo Supreme, it's the cheapest stuff you can find. I buy it at Costco or Jewel Osco in Chicago when we travel there, because this is about $20. And I think if you bought it in Cleveland, it'd probably be 50 or 60 for a bottle this big. So we get ours elsewhere. 2 tablespoons of brandy. Now people always say, what does the brandy do? Well, I think it adds a little bit of a depth of flavor. And I'll often get phone calls, people will say, well, I don't have plain brandy. Can I use cream de menthe or cream de almond or Cointreau or something, or whiskey or scotch? I wouldn't if I were you, because those things will have a very specific flavor and you may not like the way that it tastes in the challah. However, you can just leave it off if you don't have it. I wouldn't go buy it specially. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the machine running and I'm going to pour the yeast mixture in. I'm probably not going to pour it all in, you know, only because I want to make sure that the dough doesn't start to stick underneath. I want to make sure that it's dry enough so that it's moving around in a ball around the food processor. And you'll see how this goes. So it's going to be a little noisy, but bear with me. See, it's starting to make a ball already. Now I'm going to stop it because I still have quite a bit to go here. I'm going to pour more of that in. And I'm also going to add more flour because I don't want it to too sweet. Right. Sorry that the camera is shaking. A little more flour.
I hope you're not having an earthquake.
See that the ball of dough is starting to form. And when it's pulling away from the sides, that means it's pretty good consistency. It's not quite dry enough. And a little bit more flour. And you really want to mix it up quite a bit. What I'm going to do here in like 2 or 3 minutes is about 10 to 15 minutes worth of kneading by hand. And the longer it goes, the nicer the texture will be. The gluten will develop. It'll be stretchier. It'll have more body. I'm going to test to see if it's sticky just a little bit. And at this point, just a little bit of flour at a time, like a tablespoon or more, or a tablespoon or salt makes a big difference. Oh, you can tell it's my fingers are not It's not coming off of my finger. It's just the right consistency. All right, we're gonna get rid of this. Michael, will you be my handy dandy assistant here? Please take these things away. And you can take this away. All right, so now I'm going to make it into a ball. And little flour board. Let me just say a word about this board. This board was one of my mom's pastry boards, and my Uncle Herman, who was a carpenter, Uncle Herman of blessed memory, made this for her probably 60 years ago, 65 years ago, long time. She had several of them, and I got to have this one, and it's very special to me. Let me take off the chat thing, just X it out. So I'm going to dump this out. You can see it pulls out very nicely. And I love these scrapers. You can get these at any of the stores. All right, that came out nicely. And then the only thing to really be careful with is the blade. I don't know how many of you have a food processor, but you've probably all cut yourself at least once on a food processor blade. If you've done it once, you tend not to do it again. And you don't want pink challah unless you put cranberries or something. So this came out nice and clean. All right, thank you. Yeah, Michael ends up washing these things, so he's happy. So now you're gonna see it. This dough, I'm not actually going to knead it, I'm just going to put it into a ball, although the texture of it is really soft. It feels really good. And I have my ball of dough, and I have my bowl with the oil. Just smush the oil around, put the ball of dough in once and turn it over so now it's oiled on both sides. And I'm going to cover it up, and I'm going to bring, by the magic of TV here, I already have some dough that's risen. So with that. So you let that rise for about an hour and a half. The weather is a big factor in whether you're going to need more liquid in your dough or not, less liquid or not, how long it's going to take for the dough to rise. When it's humid outside, the dough tends to be stickier and you tend to need a little bit more flour, but that's why you put it in gradually at the end just to get it at the right consistency. Do we want to stop and take some questions if people have them before I move on to the next part, Marie? Does anyone have any questions about anything they've seen so far?
Nobody's put anything in the chat.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Okay, before we go further now with the braiding, what I'd like to do is I'd like to share a little bit about where my love came from and why I love to make challah so much today. So Chad, if you wouldn't mind pulling up the slides. So when I was born, when I was a year old, my mother was going to buy a birthday cake for me, and one of her friends said, "Oh, don't go buy a birthday cake. You could make one." And so she decided she would go and buy a little cake decorating set, and just so happened that the day that she went to buy that cake decorating set, there was somebody there demonstrating it, and she became fascinated. So over the next weeks and months, she was decorating cakes all the time. My first birthday, I ended up having 2 birthday cakes because my mom wanted to decorate them. This is several years later. Obviously, I don't know if I was 8 or 9 here or 7. My sister Marlene's 3 years younger than me, and that was my birthday cake. It was a butterfly cake. Several years later, my mom took that cake and another cake to the state fair and won blue ribbons for her cakes. She became quite well known, and she won a national grand prize in 1971 for her cake decorating. So it started there. We ended up having this bakery in the basement of our home where my mom did specialty cakes, cookies, and a huge wedding cake business. Next. Next slide. Yeah. So I was in theater in high school, and my mom ended up making the cakes for all of the cast parties. And when I was a senior in high school, we did the play Harvey about the 6-foot invisible rabbit. And when my mom said, "What kind of cake do you want for the cast party?" I joked, I said, "Oh, how about a 6-foot long rabbit cake?" And, you know, she thought, yeah, right. And then my dad got serious about it too. And this cake was on the front page of Mailbox News, which was put out by Wilton, their cake decorating magazine. That's a national publication. My brother-in-law Aaron knows all about that, because it was called Made of Scandinavia. Anyway, this was a fabulous cake. And if you could see him, his head and his feet are furry. They're all done with coconut. They had to get somebody's station wagon to carry that out. Next. My mom, of course, made our wedding cake. Next. And then my sister's wedding cake. Next. And bar mitzvah cakes for the kids. This one, the word Natan, is in royal icing. So those were letters that stood up on top of the cake. And in fact, I have the top of that cake still, because the royal icing will last forever. They can carbon date it, I think. Next. And Ari's bar mitzvah cake. Next. And I hope Ben isn't with us tonight because I don't have a picture of his on the screen. I'm sorry, Ben. But the thing that my mom made the least of all, and that I was most fascinated with, is when she made challah. And these are just 2 of the challahs that she made. I don't even know how many braids there are in that. It's more than 6. I have a picture somewhere, and I'm so sorry I couldn't find it for this evening. It's a picture of one of my mom's challahs where she braided with 12 different strands, and it's really magnificent. And the reason my mother didn't make this very often at all is because it was labor intensive. She would knead and knead and knead the dough, and I would say, "Mom, how do you know how long to knead it?" Because she just kept going forever. And her answer to me was, "You knead it until the ceiling sweats." And I have to tell you, I didn't understand what she meant. It took me several years before I knew what she meant. Meaning, you can knead it forever. The ceiling's not going to sweat. You can't over knead dough. Just keep kneading it, and it'll turn out beautiful. I thought that her challah was the most delicious thing, and she rarely made it because it was so labor intensive. Next. But 40 years ago, 35 years ago, whenever it was, here in Cleveland, I moved here 40 years ago, I bought my first Cuisinart food processor, and I started to bake. Now these challahs are, it's a picture from 2 years ago. I went into the shul, and it's when my son Ari and at that time his fiance Hannah got married, exactly 2 years ago, because it was June 10th was their 2nd anniversary. And so for the Shabbat dinner that we had catered at the shul, I went in the week before, I baked challahs so that every table of guests had their own challah. Next. And that's a 4-braid. You're gonna see that. Now this is, I guess it was 3.5 years ago, 3 years ago when Jacob Rud and Luria had his bar mitzvah. Wait, go back. Stay on the long ones. I had said to Erica, I would be so delighted to come. That doesn't want to stay there. Just wanted to show that picture. So I was in the shul at that time as well and baked these big ones. And these are 6-braided challahs. Okay, you go. Next. Now these are, I was getting ready for Rosh Hashanah probably, that or Shavuot. These are my 4-braided round challahs. Some of them have raisins, some don't. Because some people don't like raisins and some do. Next. Next one is a close-up of one of those challahs. Now you can see a little bit of what it looks like. And that's actually a big one. That was baked on like a 12-inch pan. I started baking these challahs about 3 months ago. These are what I call my pandemic-sized challahs. While we were socially distanced from our family, and instead of being able to have family Shabbat dinners, we would drop off at each of the kids' homes a pandemic-sized challah, so it was enough for, a couple of days for them. And I did those with a traditional 3-braid, a small 3-braid that I just then joined the 2 ends together. And 4 of those, you can go to the next picture. 4 of those are from one batch of this dough, of the 5.5 to 6 cups flour. The thing I wanted to show about this one, I don't know if it contrasts to the other one. I also started experimenting since the COVID crisis with using fresh yeast as opposed to just the dry yeast. And I really like the way the fresh yeast came out. It's just a little bit fluffier. I mean, it's all good, but I don't know if you can tell the difference between that and the picture before. They're just a little fluffier. Okay, next one. I don't know, like about 12 years ago when my oldest son, Natan, and Kate got married, I decided I wanted to bake the challahs for the wedding. And I made what I'm now calling my wedding ring challah. So this is one, not as nice as some of the others. You're going to see a few more pictures of those challahs. Okay, and that's a big one. That's two batches of this dough. Recently, I don't know if any of you watched the Great Jewish Food Festival, but one of the sessions that they had was on Shavuot. And the French, she was a French baker, I think she was a French Moroccan Jew. She baked a traditional challah for Shavuot, which is this thing that looks like Mount Sinai, or is it supposed to? I didn't quite get 7 layers. It's supposed to have, like, for the 7 weeks of the Omer. But each the strand is all the way through filled with a feta cheese with herbs and olive oil and garlic. And it is delicious and made with part white whole wheat flour and part regular flour. It was fun. Next. I mentioned to you I started to bake sourdough. So that was my sourdough from last week. It came out good, finally. And thank you to my friend Beth Siegel. I don't know if Beth is on. She was going to try to join tonight. She gave me the starter, and she and I text constantly about baking bread. Next. This is one of my favorite challahs to make. I do it at Rosh Hashanah and at Sukkot. It is an apple challah that, I'm sorry I don't have the side view as well. It's baked in a butt pan, and it really looks like a flower. And it's a cross between a dessert and a challah. It's really yummy. I'm happy to share links to the recipes for that if anybody's interested. It's not difficult. It just takes a little bit of time. Next. So now we get into a little bit more of the real thing that motivates me about baking challah. Wait, go back a sec. My father, who coordinated everything for my mom so she could do all the baking, made a point that whenever they traveled, it needs to stay on that other picture for a second, Chad. Can you go back? Made a point of taking challah, taking cookies and cake wherever they went in the world. And I do that now too. So a year and a half or 2 years ago, one of my dear cousins turned 80, and I brought a lot of goodies there, including a regular challah, and then the other one is a honey whole wheat challah that has za'atar on top. Okay. Next. That's my youngest son, Ben, and those are challahs that he made. Each of my kids has had a private tutorial. Wait, back. And Ben is the one who's really taken to it. He loves to cook, he loves to bake, so he's doing it. And my daughters-in-law also have all baked challah, and some of them more than once. So that's Ben's challah. And of course, I've gotten my granddaughters into it. This is one of the first ones that Ellie, when she was about 2, made, and she put the raisins in herself. And you can go to the next slide. And I can tell you that she thought it was really yummy. She really enjoyed it. Next. And Ellie and I frequently make challah together, and she's gotten really good at rolling out each individual strand of dough. And it's such a pleasure to see her enjoying that. We make all, Chobin and Hanukkah cookies. Next. Next one shows her favorite thing about making dough. And she loves to pound it. She loves to pound out before we're shaping it. She just thinks that's the greatest. Next. And Josie, who's 3 now, of course, she's gotten into making challah also. Next. And at Ari and Hannah's wedding, I also made challahs, and Ellie had the job of getting to say hamotzi. You can see the challahs there a little bit. Next. And this is the picture, one of the pictures that is so special to me. Those are the challahs that I made at Natana Kate's wedding. My mom and dad, my mom's in the center. Michael's mom, my mother-in-law Esther, is on the right in the pink, and my dad on the left. And then the couple behind are Kate's paternal grandparents. And we were so blessed to have all of them there. And I was blessed to have my mom be the one to say the hamotzi. And I think that's the end of the slides, right? So to me, challah is really all about family and about doing things together with family and for family that are so, so special. So we're going to get into a little bit of the braiding now. And I saw that somebody said, please do send the link to the apple challah, and I'll send that to the show and we'll get it out. All right, this is my challah cover. You can order these online. It has the blessing here for taking challah, chafri challah. We can talk about that too. So this is the dough once it's risen. You can see it's really, really nice. It's risen a lot. This is a bowl that I think is about 120 years old. It's made for bread. So I'm going to take the dough out of here. Michael? Yeah. And we're going to do the big 6 braid with this one. So just want to punch it a little bit. I'm going to knead it a little bit more, and I'm going to cut it into 6 pieces, pretty even. And then I'm going to roll each one out. And when I roll it out, what I'm trying to do, and I roll from the center and I go out, is I want to get all the air bubbles out of it. And the rolling is something that you got to get a little bit of the technique for. Sometimes people push down and they flatten it out. You want it to stay round. You don't want it to be flat, right? And you accomplish that by using your whole hand when you're rolling it. You want to have firm pressure, and I roll it so that it goes tapered at the ends. And you'll see why in a minute. And it's nice and smooth, so it's not wrinkled. And you'll see when you have enough pressure, it won't be wrinkled. Yeah. So there's one strand. I'm going to roll these a little longer than I would if I'm doing the 4 braid, because the 4 braid I'm going to do with half of a loaf of a dough. That's just the way that I do it. You can do whatever you want, but I typically do a 6 braided challah if I use the whole recipe for 1 challah, or I do the 4 braid when I split this amount of dough in half, do the other. And I have instructions on the sheet there that tells you the relative baking times and temperatures. Always, of course, you need to check your own oven, because people's ovens are hotter, cooler. It's always a good idea to have a thermometer in your oven if you're not sure. Michael, can you tilt the camera down so that people can be able to see?
Hedy, there's a couple questions in the chat.
Okay, read them to me.
What is fresh yeast and where do you get it?
Oh, okay. So fresh yeast is kept in the refrigerated section. I haven't bought yeast, by the way. I haven't bought yeast in a store, in a regular store, in Bristol in a long time. I buy it at Costco, and this is a 2-pound. It comes like a brick. I don't know if they have it again now, because I had some. I didn't need to buy any, but this lasts me, I don't know, more than half a year, maybe a whole year, close to it, and I keep it in the refrigerator. But where I got the fresh yeast is Edwin's. So Edwin's, in their butcher shop, they, which is connected to their bakery, I guess. I actually haven't even been there, but someone picked it up for me. They sell fresh yeast, and you can just look online, or I can tell you for the honey whole wheat raisin challah recipe, it says 1 package of yeast. So 1 package of yeast would be equivalent to 2/3 of an ounce of fresh yeast. So when I made this dough today, the one that I'm using right now, not the one that we made together, but the one I'm using now, I did use the fresh yeast, and I used 1 1 1/3 ounces of the yeast because I would have used 2 packages otherwise. But there's all kinds of equivalents online. Now I'm used to doing this long challah on my kitchen counter, the granite counter, and I like to use that for my challah dough, but because of the line, so I usually would like a little bit more room to do this. But what I'm doing now is I'm going to take these strands and I'm pinching them at the top, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to have the tapered end, so I have a little bit less dough there. And now I've got my 6 strands of dough. So I can't talk while I do this part or I really mess it up, but you can watch it, and if you've got the instructions, you'll see. But you start off by crossing the outer 2, and you want to just pull a little bit tight, and then the one that's on top comes down in the middle between the 4 that are left. And then we just go back and forth. And there you have it. There you have it. Now I have to get my pan, and I'll show you how I prepare my pan to bake it on. So this is a 15-inch jelly roll pan, and I can see the mark here. I go on the diagonal because it's a little bit long. I spray it with a little bit of Pam, and then I sprinkle on a little cornmeal because I like the way that the cornmeal on the bottom is. Just gives it a little nice texture, just like that. And then I'll take my dough, gather it up, put it in the pan. And now it's going to rise for another 45 minutes or so. At the half-hour point, I'm going to turn my oven on so that my oven is ready to go and nice and hot by the 45 minutes. And you'll see that it will have risen and all. The key thing, once you're at this point of baking the dough, or baking the challah, don't let it rise much more than 45 minutes to an hour, because then the braiding becomes indistinct. It kind of all flattens out. So you really want to try to just do it at once. And the other thing I was going to tell you, well, I'll tell you that. So we'll put this one aside. And now, this is a batch. This is a batch of the honey whole wheat dough recipe. And what I want to show you with this one, I'm going to do half of it as a 4 braid, but half of it I'm going to do the round 4. But I want to show you what it's like to mix raisins in. Because people always wonder, when do you put the raisins in? You put the raisins in at this point. So I smoosh it out. I suppose you could use a rolling pin, but there's really no reason to. And it's an interesting thing that happens once you add the raisins, because the dough becomes stiffer, a little bit harder to manipulate. And these are raisins, as it says in the recipe. I rinsed them under warm water for a minute or 2, and they're just a little plumper that way. They don't dry out as much in the baking. So putting a bunch of them on here like that, just smushed them down. And now I'm going to roll it up. And now I'm going to push it down again. Now it's much harder to do. Those raisins are in there. Yeah, so you get your upper body workout. And I've got the rest of the raisins. I'm going to sprinkle them in here. All right, so those are that. And if one falls out, you just put it in again. Okay, now I'm going to cut this in half. Okay, so first I'm going to do the 4 braid. And the 4 braid, I think I mentioned earlier, this is really my my go-to braid. It's like your everyday braid. You can't go wrong. So same kind of rolling. I won't roll it quite as long. Can you get me another one of those pans, my jelly roll pans?
While you're rolling the braid, there's another question in the chat about aerating it before you turned on the Cuisinart. How long do you aerate that for?
Oh, 2-3 seconds, 2-3 pulses. I mean, I turned it on. I just used the pulse function. I pulse it a couple times to just to get this, make sure the salt is evenly distributed in the bread, and it, you know, fluffs the flour up. Any other questions?
There's a request for the apple challah recipe and how you braid it.
Yeah, I'm gonna send that. That one comes with a video. It's done by a website called Julicious. And originally, I don't know if any of you know Cindy Atias. I'm not sure if she's still doing. She's a tremendous challah baker. She was selling her challah here. I think she's doing some other kinds of baking now. But she posted that recipe several years ago that she got from someplace else from this Julicious website. And the video is extremely helpful, and the photographs. So now the 4 braid, I pinched them at the top, and this one, also you can see, it's really like you're weaving. I'm always going to start. I start on the right-hand side, and I go over the one here, under the one next to it, and over. And I just keep doing that. So it's over, under, over, 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 and here's my little 4 braid. And I'll do the same thing. I'm going to even out a small round one. The silver one on the inside of the top. Yeah, right there. Now, the important thing that you would do before you bake your challahs, right before you put it in the oven, just a small one, I don't need one, is you brush it with egg. I beat up an egg, and I use a brush that I've had for years. I have one from my mom. I'll have to show it to you. It's a feather. It's what she used to use. Can you cover that with the towel? All right, now I'm going to do the round 4 braid. So making the 4 strands again. And this is what we're going to play tic-tac-toe. That's what it's going to look like. You can, of course, then one of the things I often do is I would take this whole piece of dough, I'd roll it out to about this long, tapered ends, and then I just coil it, you know, like a serpent, and I put it in a pan. You could put it on a just cookie sheet. I like to use a round pan because it just defines it a little bit more, and I think it looks nice. But either way is perfectly fine. If you don't have a round pan, I wouldn't go out and buy it just for that. Actually, just a little bit longer. So now I'm going to put 2 long strands next to each other, maybe about a 1/2 inch apart, a little bit of distance there. And I'm going to put 2 other ones across it, also leaving about a 1/2 inch like that. And then on opposite ends, I'm going to put one underneath it and put this one underneath it. So you got like this whole thing. And then starting from any place where you've got a strand that's underneath, like that one's over, so this is underneath, I'm going to go around once around with it. So once around each one like this, and you come here, and then you go back the other way. And I kind of pull them a little bit, just so this part gets nice and tight. And I'm going to go one more time the other way. All that mixed up here. And come out with what looks like this. And then once again, same thing. Put my ham, cornmeal, and the bread goes in here and it gets covered up. And so now that's going to sit. Michael, you tilt the screen back up a little bit. So of course the tilt a little bit more, Okay. So after your challah is baked, you've basted it with egg. You baked it. When it comes out of the oven, you tap it and you see if it sounds hollow, then you know it's done. And let it cool for a few minutes. Take it off the pan. Sometimes it's an overwhelming urge to eat it right then. We actually did that one time, and it was so much fun. Because usually, I mean, I bake it. Oftentimes, I bake it just before Shabbat or earlier in the day. What I was going to tell you is I have these 2-gallon bags, these hefty 2-gallon bags, and if I don't have enough time to bake to do everything on one day, especially when I was working full time, on Thursday night, I would make my dough in the food processor as I showed you. I'd put a little bit of oil in the bag. I'd stick the dough in this big bag so it has plenty of room to rise, and you put it in the refrigerator and let it rise overnight. And then an hour or so before you're ready to shape the loaves, you just take it out of the oven. I could take it out of the refrigerator, let it come to room temperature, and then it's easier to work with, and then you can shape the loaves and you're on your way. The key thing is that actual labor is, once you've done this a few times, is 10 minutes to make the dough. So it's not like it takes forever. And then you can do things. You can leave your house. You can do whatever you need to do for the next hour and a half or so. And you come back and you do the shaping of the thing, and that's another 5 or 10 minutes. And so the actual amount of labor is not so bad. You just plan your day out so that you can get those things done. The best part, of course, comes when you bring it to the table and you say the brachot and you share it with your family and your friends. And one of the things is I've always done a lot of reading about challah, about the traditions about challah, and the challah, when you do what's called a chafresh challah, if you have a certain quantity, and I don't make challah with 14 cups of flour, so I'm not obligated to do the mitzvah of taking challah. That's where you would say that bracha. That is the sacrifice. That symbolizes the sacrifice, and that gets burned in the oven, and then you throw it away. But the challah, as with any other sacrifice, was always eaten by the priest with salt, because salt is something that it both preserves and flavors, and things should be tasty and lovely. And so when you bring your challah to your table and you salt your challah right after you cut it and before you serve it, what you're doing is you're elevating your table and making it like an altar to God. So if you think about that when you're serving your challah and you shake the salt, you've elevated the whole experience for your whole family, for your friends, and in welcoming the Shabbat every week or the various Hagim, which is something that I think about, and it makes it even more special to do. I have one other little thing I just want to share with you. It's a little video clip, but before I do that, because I know we're getting close to the end, what other questions might anybody have? Be happy to answer.
I think we've asked everything that's in the chat so far.
Okay, all right. Are people gonna try to bake challah if they haven't done it before? Yes. I hope so, I hope so. So before we leave, and it's been my pleasure to be with all of you this evening, and I thank you again, Murray. I just want to share a little video of some of the pleasure I've gotten out of the fact that I've been baking challah. I was invited 2 years ago, I guess, to do a video for the Challah project. Some of you may have gone to that for the Shabbat project. I have actually never gone myself, but I said I'd be happy to do the video. And they asked me if I would do it with my granddaughters, who at the time were 5, maybe almost 5 and 2 or 4 and a half.
Josie wasn't 2 yet.
Josie wasn't 2. So 4 and a half and 1 and a half. All right. And this is an outtake from this. So I'm gonna share my screen. And pat it and mark it.
And put it in the oven for Josie.
What are we making, Josie? Yeah.
Hey, it's always sticking to the table.
Okay, so you know what? To stick in the table, let's put a little bit more flour here. Okay, now see if you can get it to that stick.
Here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna take a line and we're gonna feed it back to me.
Okay.
Okay, and we might even be able to give Ellie a
Oh,
line.
absolutely. Oh, we can do
Where's
that.
the line?
She's gonna say something and then she wants you to repeat it. Okay?
Okay,
Okay.
I'm gonna first say it to Sarah,
Okay.
and then you can also say it if you want to. Baking challah is one of my greatest joys.
Baking challah.
was my favorite choice.
And baking challah is one of my greatest joys.
Let's do it one more time. Just a second.
Okay, just me right now. Baking challah is one of my greatest
I
joys.
can't do it too. I'm gonna put a little more flour.
Here.
Just a little.
Here, Ellie. There you go. Here, now do your part.
Now I'm gonna see.
Okay, Josie, can you roll this?
If it won't.
Oh, no, don't eat it. It's yucky. It's yucky. We laugh every time we see that. We just love that thing. Anyway, thank you all very much. Thank you for allowing me to share one of my greatest joys, which is making challah with all of you.
All right, and let me just close out here. And thank you so much, Hedy. We all learned a lot, and it was really a lot of fun in bringing in the connection to your family and to the traditions. It was really wonderful. I learned a few things, like I think you said royal frosting lasts forever.
Yeah.
And I've never heard a Jewish related thing talking about it has risen quite a few times here. So I didn't quite get that. But you know, you say you can't go wrong with Fort Braid. Well, we can't go wrong with Hedy Milgrom. So thank you so much. And please come back next week for Leah and Shira's class. And that's it for today. Thank you, Hedy, and thank you, Chad.
Thank
And
you.
good night.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.